Welcome to the Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Saturday, we explore stories that are shaping the African continent. Nigeria's inflation rate fell to 24.48% in January 2025 from 34.8% in December 2024 after the government updated how it measures inflation. The new method reduced the impact of food prices in the calculation and adjusted the weights for housing and transportation. Food inflation is now 26.08%, while core inflation is 22.59%. Urban areas saw higher inflation, 26.09% compared to rural areas, 22.15%. How will this new inflation calculation affect the cost of living? Lawmakers moved four tax bills forward despite disagreement. Northern leaders worry Lagos will get more VAT revenue, while the South supports the changes. The general VAT rate will rise to 15% by 2030, but some essential goods will be tax-free. How will the VAT increase impact businesses and customers? Sudan minister thanked Russia for blocking a UN intervention. Fighting continues with over 28,000 deaths and millions displaced. The army rejected a ceasefire and accused the EU of helping its rivals. Famine is worsening in Darfur. What can be done to help people affected by the war? Joining us for insight is Samuel Article. Welcome, Samuel, to the week ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica, for actually having me on the program.
It's always exciting to have you. Let's just get right into it. With the new figures we're seeing from the Nigeria inflation rate has dropped. And, this is due to the new calculation um, that Nigeria has decided to use. How does this change in the way of inflation is calculated? How does this affect government policies and as well our economic planning?
Yeah, thanks. I think on the surface, it dropped to 20. I think it's 24.48%. The new inflation rate. Yeah, on the surface, if you look at it, it might seem encouraging, but in reality, I would say that it's more of just a statistical adjustment, and I can explain what it means. It means that in 2000 in 2019, price actually did rise. 2020 price rise, 2021 price is up, 22, 23. Oh, government say, okay, don't let's look at 2019, 2020. Let's start looking at what happened between 2023 and now. But the truth is that the price of goods and services continue to rise. And so the way I look at it and the way people should view this is that it's just a measurement methodology that have changed, right? You're simply reducing and then also the way inflation is computed in Nigeria. Before, food price account for one of the biggest chunk of inflation. So when you are calculating inflation, they look at household income and they say, okay, what are you spending your money on? So historically, majority of Nigerians spend a lot of money on food. So what has happened is that the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics had reduced uh, how much they perceive people spend on food and put more weight on housing and transportation. And that redefines how we see inflation. But I think on the flip side, it's important for us to say this. First, food inflation. Whether we like it or not, food is a tax. When the price of foods and services continues to go up, whether you are living in rural areas, whether you're living in urban areas, your price of your basic staple like gari, rice, beans, oil, all those things that are going on. It's a big burden, right? It's a big burden on those households, meaning that you don't have excess money to spend on other things. That's one. If you look at Nigeria, for instance, in the urban areas where you can't farm yourself, your entire income will most likely, if you look closely at how much of your income is going to buying food, it is huge, right? What government is saying that, oh, really, you are not really spending much in that term. So they must have done some calculation and they believe that, oh, you are not, before maybe you're spending 40% on your income on food. They say, oh, now maybe it's about 30%. And that one way or the other impacts the headline figure. So it's not enough to look at the headline figure. I think it's for us to dive deeper into the key core issues that is driving inflation. One of it is whether we like it or not. For instance, housing is a good example. Everybody knows in Nigeria now, whether you live in Abuja, whether you live in Lagos, whether you live in Port Harcourt, that your house price, the money you are paying for rent, had gone up astronomically. And for context, if you are paying house rent, right, you are just in a minority. Majority of Nigerians don't pay house rent, especially people living in rural areas. They don't pay house rent. So house rent is not impacting their pocket significantly, except maybe we are living in urban areas. But whether we like it or not, food affects everybody equally. Of
True.
course, when you look at the other side of things also, if you are living in rural areas, because you plant your goods and services, even if you don't have money, you can go into your farm and get some things out. So the balance, the delicate balance in how we measure this thing is important. I will end by saying that whether we like it or not, the bottom line is that the cost of living in Nigeria continue to drop. The cost of living continues to go up,
To
right?
go
We
up.
have a
Yeah.
cost of living crisis.
Crisis.
People are struggling, and that is what is important. I can give you a good example, and I will end with this. I remember in 2019, I went to Okiogun area in Nigeria, and then I was doing a focus group discussion with some pregnant women that have to commute between their communities. It's a riverine community. They have to commute to the nearest primary health care center to actually attend antenatal care. And they were complaining that it cost them about 1,000 naira to go in, another 1,000 naira to come in, right? And if you're expected to go 4 times, let's say in a month, that's ridiculous, right? 2 times 8 is already how much? 2 times 4 is 8,000 naira. They could not afford that 8,000 naira. That was dead. Now, going back to ask them how much it costs now to make that trip, it's now going to cost them 3,500 to just make one trip. So most of them can't even go for antenatal care. And you know the implication of that in terms of because you are not being attended to with skilled attendants. All the metrics that Nigeria had improved on, like maternal mortality rate, infant mortality rate, and all those things, are beginning to nosedive. And that is why we keep saying that the thief of time, inflation, it's a criminal thing. A society should not allow inflation to crop in and actually steal away people's time. Unfortunately, the situation we are in Nigeria is such that inflation continues to buy. So I think the overall goal there is that it's important to look away from the number, the adjustment, and look at the core issue. The core issues are still there. And government needs to take corrective measures to make sure that inflation reins in and we begin to actually have a stable price and begin to grow our economy.
I do agree with you because the honest truth is we can see the effects of inflation in our housing costs, transportation costs, even the price of food. But like if the core issues are not addressed, these things will keep rising. And like you said, it needs to be addressed. So I would like to ask, with the food prices now having less weight in our inflation calculations, could this impact how the government addresses food insecurity?
Yeah, this is a statistical adjustment. It has nothing to do with what happens in the market. I think it's important to that. But to the core issue as to whether reduction in food inflation improves uh, security, yeah, whether we like it or not, that's the fact. Remember that the rising price of food are symptoms of bigger issues, whether we like it or not. The fact that farmers in the northeastern region of the country, in the southwestern region of the country, in the northwestern region of the middle belt, the output drops. The volume of foods that you're producing drops significantly. Or let's use this way, the volume of food that you should produce, you're not producing up to that level. And one way or the other, the little that goes into the market now gets inflated. That's one. Number two, infrastructure to actually farms to stable to the table. Call it the stable to the table initiative, right? Because of you see them raise price arbitrarily. I remember before COVID, they went around, some of these middlemen picking up goods, right? Buying goods from farmers, very small farmers that don't have ability to store things. They picked it up from them at very low price. And then when the crisis started, and then now, and I've said this before, if you dive back about 2,000 years ago, the Romans were using plows, they were using some modes of animals to actually till their soil. Even in Nigeria today, we are not even using the technology used 2,000 years ago to cultivate our farms. In fact, most of the crude things that we use for farming today should belong to the museum, not on the farm. We need to right? That Nigeria needs to move to that. Unfortunately, we've been on this for long, and nothing seems to have happened. If you look at Nigeria, for instance, the tractor to farm ratio, we measure it using the horsepower to farm ratio. It's one of the lowest in the world. So we really do not power our farms with modern things. We use old crude energy to actually do that. That's also those are the core issues that needs to be addressed. And then there's now the issue around land administration. There's a big issue around the dichotomy. For instance, most of the farms in Nigeria are being owned by men. Some of them are not even cultivating on those lands. And the highest number of farmers in Nigeria are women. So there's a gender issues around this. Women are not allowed to own lands in some places. So most of them are left with these bad, disused lands to cultivate. And the yield that you get from those lands that you are cultivating on is ridiculously very low. So I can go on and on and on and on like that. So there are core issues that needs to be addressed for us to move from where we are to this other side. And until we fix those problems, we continue to have this challenge that we are having. The alternative is for us to open our border to allow food to flood into the country. And we know definitely that has not been the policy stand of the government itself. And then there's this whole big conversation around whether we should even allow GMOs, I mean, genetically modified commodities to flow into the country. So we have this big front and back going on in Nigeria. All these things put together is creating most of this chaos that we are seeing. The takeaway here is that for us to fix the issue in terms of food, we have to go to those core issues and address them. Until we address those issues, this problem will persist. And that's what has happened since 1960 to date.
Yeah, so true. Let's move on to the next story where we're seeing the tax reform in Nigeria. So this week, lawmakers moved four tax bills forward despite disagreements. What might the new VAT sharing formula reshape, the economic power dynamics between the Nigerian region?
I think the first thing is, I think it's a little bit confusing as to how and what will happen at the end of the day. I think the first challenge we have is to understand. I mean, it's because we are so comfortable with where we are, and then the projection as to where we are going seems to be rooted in a lot of, I'll call it perspective. It depends on the person you are talking to. So if, for instance, if you talk to Mr. A will tell you that, oh, this new policy is going to drag my income down. If you tell him what are the variables you are using to make this projection, it's not clear. And then you talk to Mr. B will tell you, oh, based on hypotheticals. So most of what what we are building our future on, and it all boils down to the whole concept of marksmanship in economics. Economics are logical work that you need to do. So the first thing is that what are the fundamental assumptions that we are using to arrive at where we are? I mean, to arrive at the issues that the point that we are trying to push. Those fundamentals are not, I'll call it in most cases, not logical. That's the first thing to think about. The second thing is that if you look at the VAT proposal, yeah, you notice that it has taking a regional economic divide concept. Oh, the North says, oh, this is going to affect us, the South is going to benefit, and then we keep shifting around in circles. That has been the bane of political decisions, economic decisions, and even many decisions that you have in Nigeria. But for a classical business, right? If we say, oh, if you're a small business or you're an SME, whether we like it or not, my own perception is this. If you require Coca-Cola to begin to document how many goods it's going, it's selling in Lagos, in Ogun State, in Oyo State, in virtually every state in the Federation, whether we like it or not, the compliance cost is going to go up. That's my point. The question is that should that be the fundamental principle? Should Nigeria be putting the burden of ascertaining where goods and services are sold on businesses, or should that be the responsibility of the government itself? We need to answer that question. Personally, I think that the cost of doing business in Nigeria is too high. Adding more compliance burden on businesses can be telling. I do not subscribe that that is good enough. That is number one. Number two, there's the long run. So those are big issues. I think I talked about the compliance cost that we need to look closely at. I think the second issue that should be debated, not this regional conversation, is around how do we get, I always talk so much about the concept of improving public participation in decision making. The context of ensuring the voices of the people that will live in the reality of the new initiative need to be heard. The unfortunate truth is that most small businesses are not on the table when this conversation is being held. Most, I mean, if you look around you, you see a lot of small businesses. They are the ones that will bear most of the brunt. They are not on the table when this conversation is being held. And that raises a whole lot of questions around what kind of democracy, what kind of participatory governance that we are having in the country. So the big takeaway for me here is that in the long run, this could help one way or the other. If you look at it and you try to project in the long run, it could help one way or the other readjust some of these issues that might create conflict in future. But I will tell you, and then if that resources begin to get into state, of course, we increase and enhance. Number one, we are increasing it by 15%. If states begin to get that money, maybe they could divert that money into improving infrastructure, and then one way or the other, that cascade into helping grow the economy. But you have to justify this. How do we justify this? We need to build on the transparency and accountability around this fund. Unfortunately, that's not even being debated as we speak now. Nobody's talking about transparency around this funding. Nobody's talking about accountability around these funds. And that's where my biggest fear is.
I mean, it's interesting that you say that, transparency and accountability is something that, I mean, in the conversations that we're not hearing people speak about that. The most conversation we're hearing from the government is, oh, it's not a fair sharing formula. How do you think that government can be more accountable and more transparent in terms of VAT as well, that would bring back that confidence in citizens to trust that process to ensure that, while we pay our taxes, while taxes are going up, we know that, our life and our economic benefit is improving?
I think there are a couple of things. There are a couple of things that government can do. I think it's well laid down. If you, for instance, if you look at the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, which is what Nigeria did sign up to, I think it did lay out some of the principles that government needs to align and adapt for you to be seen as transparent. And then there's the concept of accountability. Now, the first thing is you have to ensure that all your key budget information, right, your fiscal informations are published. I could give you a good example. States, you need to make sure that before you give people ample time, more like 3 months before the budget is passed. The executive creates I'll call it a pre-budget statement, more like what we call the medium-term expenditure framework. You need to create it. You need to ensure that the voice of people are captured during the process of creating these documents. ensure that there are spaces for people to talk about this issue. It's not about you going into a meeting, making a PowerPoint presentation and telling people what you want to do. It's about sitting down and listening to what people feel about their government. Remember, that government is their own. It's not your own government as a political office holder. That's the first starting point. Then the second thing you need to think about is, okay, having published this document, what other things can you do? One, you need to, you need to ensure that having put in these things and taking people's feedback, you need to tell people how their feedbacks are being used to inform the budget. The pre-budget statement, now the budget being prepared, the executive budget proposal. And this document needs to be public. It needs to be published. People must see it and put it. Then during the process of approving and enacting it into law, that deliberation that you have with the legislator, people need to go there and then interface with their legislators. It's not just civil society actors. The voices of people needs to be heard. Business owners, the people that are working. Everybody needs to be in the room or in the space. I won't call it a room. And we have opportunities for that. There's now virtual ways of doing things. It's not expensive. We can get that done. Let the voice. It's not just about even listening to people. You have to tell people how their ideas are being used to inform your budget. That's how you improve transparency. So when the final budget document comes out, you need to build systems and processes around it to make sure money are not stolen. It's not about bringing in FCC to be harassing people after the money has been stolen. You have to ensure that you put systems and control measures around how funds are being released, how the funds are being released, how they are used to ensure that the money is not stolen. And then you are consistently monitoring it and you're giving people feedback on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis, on a daily basis, how their funds are being used. At the end of the year, you do the audit. In Nigeria, we focus and fixate too much around financial audits. It's good, but it's important to look at compliance audit. It's important to look at performance audit. How has this spending improved life of people? How has this spending, this VAT that you have paid, this tax that we've collected from you, how has it been able to enhance the health of people in that state, in that locality? Those are key things that needs to come out. When people begin to see this, they can connect their money to improvement in their lives. And with that, you enhance and you build trust. I just give a crash course on GIFT. I'm sure people at the budget office in most states will give you the same lecture.
Yeah.
The political way to get it done is what is missing. And that is the problem with Nigeria. Yeah. That's where the problem is.
Hopefully, our leaders, put in that political will and we will continue to make our, country better. Let's move to our final story. We have the Sudan conflict and foreign involvement. How does Russia's involvement in blocking UN intervention in Sudan shape the future of Sudan's sovereignty and peace efforts as well?
I think what is happening, it's a sad one. What is happening in Sudan is very sad. Over 28,000 lives
True.
lost. We have millions of people displaced. And then you could see how the political stalemate and then the geopolitical stalemate, right, is exacerbating the whole issue. Now, it's sad when you look at it in that light. I think for me personally, my perception here is that the immediate priorities the immediate priority of African leaders is to look at how they can trigger the instrument of the African Union to begin to step up and take decisive actions. Regardless of disagreement, it should not come at the cost of human life. You cannot continue to displace millions of people because of some disagreement that some people have in their house. I'm sure it's just one side talk that started this whole nonsense, and before you know it, it has escalated to this point. So my take is that the African Union needs to step up and begin to take decisive action. That's one. Number two, there's an urgency for establishing an humanitarian corridor eh, that needs to begin to help people that are already living in the reality of the challenges that we're seeing in Sudan. That should be the immediate role. And unfortunately, it's sad to say that USAID is off the grid, and then many donors are also scoffed to actually do help in one way or the other. We need to find a way to get humanitarian support to these people. Unfortunately, again, I keep using the word unfortunately, it's not getting enough attention from the globe the way other regions will have gotten. That's number two. I know a lot of grassroots organizations in that space. I try to pull calls, I try to see, they're trying their best, but again, their best, most of them are underfunded, they're overstretched. What kind of support can the international community give these groups to actually help those people that are displaced so that more people does not continue to die? And then by extension, that doesn't even lead to even wider epidemic among them. Because again, when you see people displaced and people running after scatter, remember, we all have one life to live. Once that life is damaged by wars and all those things, it's very difficult to actually reestablish the normalcy in those regions. So the question is that what's the EU, what's China, what's the US, what is Russia, what are everybody doing to actually help at least support people that are displaced in terms of humanitarian support? Those are things that needs to go there. I think in the long run, we need a diplomatic effort, right, to pivot from just public condemnation. I mean, it's not just enough to begin to condemn, to actually pragmatic negotiation. We need to adopt the concept of pragmatic negotiation. Condemnation itself, oh, I condemn you for doing this, it doesn't stop people from dying. We need to begin pragmatic negotiation. And it's important to mention that Nigeria's role in all of this needs to be up. Nigeria cannot continue to sit on its hands and do nothing. South Africa cannot continue to sit on its hands. Egypt, right? Egypt, I mean, it's very close to them. They can't continue to sit on their hand and do nothing. We need to actually step in and begin. We've gone through this process before. This problem has been addressed, solved. Why are we back to where we are? I think those are the key issues that need to be addressed when it comes to Sudan. I keep saying it's a very sad situation that we find ourselves. Nobody, no human being will want to find it himself in such situation. And unfortunately, a disagreement and then disagreement between people just cascade into people losing life. I think that's very, very sad to see.
Thank you very much. That concludes today's episode. Thank you, Samuel, for being with us and sharing your thoughtful insights that made this conversation so engaging. To all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe if you are yet to. Like, share, and drop a comment. For deep insights into our work, you can visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you for tuning in to the week ahead. Join us next Saturday for more updates shaping the African continent.